Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Can the Cowboys really sneak into the playoffs without Dak Prescott? Also, the Heat cooled a bit by the Bucks, and the AFC playoff picture is all but written in ink. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Dallas Cowboys beat the Washington Commanders on Sunday, even with Cooper Rush. And if you look around the NFC, that fight for the 7th seed is taking place with pillows right now. And that means the Dallas Cowboys, who have the New York Giants, not exactly the football giants lately, on Thanksgiving, they could be right back in this thing. No Dak Prescott the rest of the year. Landon McCool from Locked On Cowboys is shaking his head on the line right now. Is this one of those, like, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in? Or are you going, this is over, this is fool's gold?
It's both, right? It feels like it's both. The whole week, last week it was, oh man, the Cowboys may not win another game the rest of the season, even though they had to play Carolina. And which, I mean, look at how that turned out against Kansas City. Yeah. And then suddenly now this week, it's oh man, the Cowboys might not lose another game for the rest of the season. When you look at that schedule, I mean, obviously, I think that's overstating things, but the tenor of the conversation has certainly changed in the last 48 hours, I would say, with a very surprising win in Washington. Although I have to say, I don't imagine that it's going to change the course of the Cowboys' playoff hopes too much. At the very least, was a very good feel-good win for a team that desperately needed something to hang their hats on.
Well, especially the way that it happened, right? You have the almost Hail Mary 2.0, the Terry McLaurin play, and you're going, oh my God, not again. And then the Commanders miss the field goal, which in some ways kind of feels like the football gods going, we gave you one, now we got to take one back. That's right. And it still goes down right to the very end. It does. If you're a Cowboys fan, you got to be going like, hey, we stole this one. Now let's go make hay, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, like if you wanted to like snapshot in a moment in time, you could talk about how I think it was 5 minutes left to go in the game. The Cowboys were up 13-9 in a game that ended up finishing up 34-26. You know, that's legitimate. That actually is what happened. And I think in that 5 minutes,
that sounds like college football.
I mean, seriously. So that's funny you mentioned that because someone asked CeeDee Lamb after the game if he's ever been involved in a game like that, and he looked at him and he goes, yeah, man, I played in the Big 12 for 4 years. So I think it was like a Big 12 game. And in some ways, it felt like a Big 12 game this season, the kind of roller coaster up and down that you're experiencing. And really, it's like the Cowboys, fandom experienced the full spectrum of up and down just in those last 5 minutes of that game against Washington. So, I mean, honestly, it was really, it feels like I'm saying this a lot, but it was kind of a microcosm for the whole season, just the way something stupendously awesome would happen and then something stupendously stupid and bad would happen just kind of in consecutive plays. And the Cowboys were just holding on for dear life and to see how it ended up.
Yeah, it was quite the finish and certainly exciting to watch. Jerry Jones then goes on the radio and made waves, as he is often wont to do. I'm talking about a Mike McCarthy contract extension. Last time we talked to your co-host, Marcus Mosher, on this very program, Marcus made it seem like it was fait accompli, that this was going to be a Mike McCarthy ouster at the end of the regular season. To what degree do you believe it is just over in Dallas for Mike McCarthy?
I mean, listen, I think it certainly feels like he's being angled to take the fall here. I'll say this. I think of all the things, if you're power ranking who's at fault for what has gone on this year with the Cowboys, I definitely think that Mike is further down on the list than some of these other coaches would be in situations like this. I don't know that it's necessarily been his decision making as a head coach, and I will preface that as a head coach, that has been the problem here. I think there's been some personnel issues, which he's not as involved in. There's been some injuries, obviously. There's been some very bad play. And then there's been the offensive play calling situation, which he is very much involved in. But this whole situation got brought up by Troy Aikman, actually. The reason the question was even asked to Jerry Jones was because last night on Monday Night Football, Troy Aikman was gushing about the job that Mike McCarthy was doing and talking about how the Cowboys players still want to play for him. So I think that there's a lot of angles here. I could certainly see why this is kind of coming out a little bit, because I do think it's a little bit unfair, the portion of blame that Mike McCarthy has gotten for what's gone on this season. Having said all that, I don't necessarily want him back as the head coach next year unless he's willing to kind of take a step back and hand over the play calling duties to an actual separate entity offensive coordinator, not just a puppet offensive coordinator who's calling his play sheet. I think that's, as far as a head coach, a CEO manager type, I think Mike McCarthy's done a pretty good job. It's the play calling that has become the problem with his aspect of things.
Couldn't you copy and paste almost everything that you just said about Mike McCarthy to the guy who owns the team?
To a large degree, but I also think that the difference this year is that it's not Mike McCarthy who's saying that we're all in, right? It's not Mike McCarthy who is ignoring the blatant clear holes in the roster. I mean, obviously he's involved.
Well, but that's my point. Like, Jerry Jones is the guy who seems to be taking an outsized role in all of this. That he's the one that if he could just take a step back and maybe fully hand the reins over to Will McClay, that would be the best thing for this organization. You and I just both know that's never going to happen.
Yeah. Well, Peter, if my brother married a monkey, then I'll be a monkey's uncle or something. Listen, if that was a possibility, if replacing Jerry Jones, the GM, was an option, we've been calling for that for a decade plus at this point. I think, here's my take on this is that as a Cowboys fan, there's certain things that you just have to learn to deal with. And that right now, Jerry Jones isn't going away until he's dead. So you either have to accept that and kind of try to figure out how this is going to work in the parameters of that, or you can go the other route, which is, basically pulling your hair out and screaming at clouds until Jerry's dead. And you'll probably end up losing more hair than he will before he dies.
You can stay up to date all year on the Dallas Cowboys by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Cowboys on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Your Locked On Sports Today coming up, the Bucs threw some water on the Heat without Giannis Antetokounmpo. Before we get to that, Aaron Rodgers is trying to comfort Jets fans. Isn't that sweet? Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. I kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will putting up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Despite reports, Aaron Rodgers says he hasn't decided if he will play in 2025, and that if he does, the Jets would be his first choice to play for. He said to ESPN's Pat McAfee, "I don't know if I want to play yet, but New York would be my first option." I just said that. That's okay. Rodgers, who turns 41 next Monday, said he will base his decision on how his body feels and whether the Jets want him back. This feels eerily similar to the conversations around Aaron Rodgers when he was saying, I don't know if the Packers want me back, right before the Packers traded him to the Jets. Something to think about. Tyreek Hill had 2 traffic charges against him dropped on Monday. The court dismissed both charges as the responding officer in a traffic incident that went viral on social media. The responding officer failed to appear. Hill was pulled over by Miami-Dade police officer Manuel Batista outside Hard Rock Stadium hours before the Dolphins' regular season opener September 8th for allegedly speeding, and was cited for careless driving and failure to wear a seatbelt. The incident, as I mentioned, went viral, and Miami-Dade police officer Danny Torres was seen dragging Hill out of his vehicle and forcibly placing handcuffs on the star wide receiver. Hill said in a Tuesday post on X, "Where are all the internet cops now?" Indeed. NBA Cup group play brought together 2 teams who have, outside of the Celtics, run the Eastern Conference. The Bucks got a late game win over the Heat. Our Locked On Bucks host broke down the win.
The gold standard tonight in the first half, Frank, was Damian Lillard, who had 25 points. He could not miss. And look, if you would have told any of us this a couple of games ago, I don't know how many would have believed it. He'd really been mired in a shooting slump. I don't know how much of that had to do with coming back from the concussion. We saw some of it beforehand. But this was everything you envisioned in the first half from Damian Lillard. And not coincidental that it's the night where he is the number one guy, because these are the spots he really excelled in last year when Giannis was out.
Yeah, I always think back to the game in Toronto last year. I think they lost the first game against Toronto last year, and then
a bloodbath.
Giannis was out. And then Giannis was out when they were up in Toronto for a bit of a revenge game, and Dame was unstoppable, and his shooting and his passing, and they kind of won a blowout. And that felt like, it's hard to say that was like a turning point game because obviously they expired their coach a couple months later. But that was an important game, I thought, early in the season. And, this game, there were real stakes with this game, right? This was a game that if the Bucks won, they would be even further in the driver's seat for their NBA Cup group, which, maybe some people don't care about as much. But, hey, we don't know exactly how far this Bucks team's going to go. So, of course, we have bigger ambitions with this team than just an NBA Cup. But I had fun with it last year, when you're winning games and you have a chance to win something, that's good. To do it in Miami, Bucks had lost 6 games in a row on the road, period, since opening night in Philadelphia. And obviously Miami is a place where they have had a very spotty record. They've had some really good performances there, but obviously have had some very forgettable ones as well, especially going back to that playoff series a couple years ago, which obviously sort of was, the trigger point for some of the huge changes that this franchise has seen over the last couple of years. And then I think, just the symbolic opportunity to get back to 500, right? 500, I don't think, I've ever been as excited to see the Bucks at 500, since, I don't know, certainly since the Bud era, right? Maybe there are times during the Kid era I was happy to see the Bucks get to 500, but after the tough start and, everybody piling on and the fake insiders talking about, GMs thinking the Bucks could trade Giannis here or there, whatever it might be, to regroup and have this team come together and win a bunch of games they should have won in most cases, right? But to take care of business and consistently show up night to night. And then in this game, Giannis ends up, he was questionable with a calf injury. I hope to never hear the word soleus, whatever it was. Again, the last calf injury he had last spring, but then gets ruled out due to a knee effusion in his left knee, which I looked it up. It's basically like a fluid buildup around the knee. Yeah. Don't love that either, Justin, but he does have, however many days off now until Saturday. So hopefully here he'll have had, basically a week off essentially between games, which, we've seen the Bucks. They typically like to try to do that, right? Like if you can have him miss 1 or 2 games and get really an extended period off, that's often how they've sort of strategically rested him. So to have the NBA Cup kind of component of this, chance to get back to 500 after all the early season struggles, to do it in Miami against the Heat, snap that kind of road, streak that they've had for a while here now since opening night in Philadelphia, and to prove that you can do it without Giannis, who obviously has been the driving force of everything good. This is just I'll call it a great win, right? I mean, I usually say it like any win without Giannis is a great win. A road win without Giannis, a road win against a rival who obviously has playoff ambitions, and having that little extra cup kind of component is great. And as you said, I mean, for Dame to look like Dame and fill, that superstar role the way he did tonight was awesome. I mean, I think you can extend it. He hit those 2 early threes in the third quarter as well. And so he was at 31 points very quickly. And then obviously the last quarter and a half became a very different type of basketball game for the Bucks, with what Spo and the Heat kind of went to different looks. We saw more zone, and then we saw a lot of doubling, trying to get the ball out of Dame's hands, and was not the most confidence inspiring there in the fourth quarter. But credit to the Bucks. They did what they had to do. And at the end of the day, they hit a bunch of shots today for 3. They didn't really do a whole lot else in this game, but they made enough shots. Guys stepped up. A lot of names we'll talk about who we haven't talked about much in terms of contributing. And it's just a great team win, right? I think I was just texting with our friend game, right? I mean, these are the kind of games that I think just bring a different sort of energy to a locker room, to, the plane ride back home, because guys that were on the bench haven't been contributing much, got a chance to play and do things to help the team. And everybody, I think, collectively probably feels like, man, we showed that we can do this even, when Giannis needs a night off. So all around, I rate it 5 stars, Justin. Leave my review on the App Store or wherever, Apple Podcasts. That's my review of this Bucks game. And whether they won by 20 or 3 or 1 point, this was a really satisfying win.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And it's another one of, I think this is the 3rd this season, which again, something that, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, we wouldn't have really celebrated this, but I think this is the 3rd win this season that they never trailed in, that the Heat just tied it. And these are games that we'll get to what we saw late in this one in the fourth quarter and second half of the third quarter. But these are games that the Bucks have found ways to lose in the last 12 months. So we're starting to see some progress there on that front, that they're at least hanging on to win these games.
You can stay up to date all year long on the Milwaukee Bucks by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bucks on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the AFC playoff picture looks set. It looks clear who's going to win each division in the AFC. And in the case of the AFC North, it will be one of 2 teams, with the other getting the top wild card spot. Then there's the Chargers and Broncos rounding out the wild card race right now. Is that likely to change? Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson don't think so, as they discussed in a recent episode of the aptly named Peacock and Williamson.
Okay, so there's 5 teams. Are we one of the things I want to talk about today is are we done? How done are we? The NFL is chaos. I know, but there's so many teams in both conferences that have a nice little lead. The Chargers and Broncos are 7-win teams, and there's nobody within a win of them. The Dolphins are next in the 8th seed with 5 wins, and we just talked about the Colts 5 wins, and the Bengals are 10 right now at 4-7. Nobody else with 3 wins or fewer should be in the conversation. Maybe the Bengals shouldn't even be in this conversation. Are we done? Do we already know the playoff field in the AFC? Chiefs, Bills, Steelers, Texans, Ravens, Chargers, Broncos.
Kind of. I mean, I really feel like a Chargers win last night would have gone a long way to making me feel like they're basically in. But they finished with 2 really easy games, and they don't have all that brutal of a stretch. But I look at the Chargers and I look at Denver and think, if they can manage 3 more wins apiece between them and get to 10, that's going to do it. I mean, I don't think the Bengals or the Colts or the Dolphins can get there quite to that level. Maybe, but I think 10 probably gets you in if you can win 3 more.
And we just talked about the Bengals. Sorry to interrupt. We just talked about the Bengals because they have to win out to get to 10-7. You only have to be 500 if you're the Broncos, and the Bengals would still lose the tiebreaker most likely unless something really changes with who wins those conference games the rest of the way. And so you're in a really good spot right now if you're the Chargers or the Broncos, and obviously control your own destiny.
The teams are more or less set, and what's more, it doesn't really matter. There are 3 teams that matter in the AFC: the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. I understand the Ravens might not even win their own division, but in a playoff game, there's no way I'm picking the Steelers to win a game over the Ravens, even though just a few weeks ago we saw the Steelers win a game over the Ravens. Parity reigns in the NFL, but talent is the most important thing in the postseason. And there are 3 quarterbacks, apologies to Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, that have really levitated above everyone else over the last few years in the AFC, even with Patrick Mahomes not playing to his usual superhuman level this year. It's Josh Allen, it's Lamar Jackson, the 2-time MVP, and Patrick Mahomes, the 2-time reigning Super Bowl champion. Everyone else is playing for somewhere else, not even a distant third, because that's 3 teams. It doesn't really matter what the Steelers do. It doesn't matter if the Bengals can get hot enough to sneak in. It doesn't really matter if the Chargers can get enough offensive playmaking between now and the end of the season to get into the postseason. They cannot hang with all of those 3 teams that I mentioned. They might be able to beat one. You might be able to spring an upset over one of those teams. No one else in the AFC can beat all of those teams except those 3 teams. So the fact that it's more or less set, that's fine, because no one else really matters in the AFC. And finally, the top 4 remain unchanged in the college football playoff rankings. Number 1, Oregon. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Texas. And number 4, Penn State remain atop the selection committee's rankings entering the final week of the regular season. Indiana dropped 5 spots to number 10 following its 38-15 loss at Ohio State, but remain in position to earn a college football playoff bid with a win over 10-loss Purdue. So they're probably going to do that. Notre Dame replaced the Hoosiers at number 5 following its 49-14 rout of undefeated Army, which dropped out of the committee's top 25 this week. Miami at number 6, Georgia number 7, Tennessee number 8, and SMU number 9 joined Indiana in rounding out the top 10. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, we get you ready for some Thanksgiving football. So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.